Ladies and gentlemen, hit subscribe to this channel right now. The birthright citizenship case that is upcoming in the Supreme Court will end up, I think it's almost a done deal, will end up in blocking and ending nationwide injunctions. You just saw a Supreme Court victory that Justice John Roberts and conservatives gave President Trump the other day. The justices granted an immediate request for the Trump administration to lift a nationwide injunction. That was the other day. Supreme Court lifts injunction barring deportations under Alien Enemies Act. The Supreme Court allowed President Trump and lifted the injunction, nationwide injunction under the Alien Enemies Act. That was a standoff between President Trump and a federal judge. The Supreme Court sided with Trump. Supreme Court sided with Trump the other day as well. The Supreme Court gave two back-to-back victories several weeks back to President Trump. Hit subscribe to this channel right now. You will hear from President Trump. You'll hear from the legal analysis and also AOC backing the end of nationwide injunctions, which is one of the reasons I think, because you'll have liberal Supreme Court justices, maybe one of the three, actually side with Justice Roberts. John Roberts and the Supreme Court, Clarence Thomas, Justice Thomas, and Justice Alito and everybody there will end nationwide injunctions. That'll be a huge victory for President Trump. Hit subscribe to this channel right now. Even Democrats will secretly appreciate the ruling. You will see why in a second.
Okay, Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt there in the Supreme Court delivering not just one, but two victories for President Trump in just 24 hours. First, it upheld Trump's deportations of criminal illegal aliens, including from Venezuela. And then it ruled President Trump can fire probationary federal workers. That those workers can be let go in 6 government departments: Defense, Agriculture, Energy, Interior, Treasury, and the VA. Let's bring in Project 21 Chair Horace Cooper. Horace, what do you make of all this Supreme Court action here?
Well, there's been a little bit more said about the ruling than the ruling actually says. It is true that you are required to provide due process, but this case had a lot more to do with forum shopping, allowing left-wing activists to pick courts that they felt would be sympathetic to their arguments and allowing those courts to stymie the Trump administration. What the court said was that there is an appropriate and historic place where the cases have to proceed, and they have to be treated in a circumstance like this as a habeas petition, a Latin word. Let us have the body. You must do it in the jurisdiction where you were either held or last being held. Washington, D.C. didn't fit that.
Yeah, and
And that was a huge, huge victory for President Trump on his way on the Roberts Supreme Court. John Roberts will lead the charge to end the nationwide injunctions.
Case. But so Horace, do Democrats need a better strategy of resisting Trump than going to the courts?
I have said this continuously. You set yourself up for failure by engaging in lawfare. Not only do you run a high risk of losing, but you also run the risk that when the court doesn't go your way, Congress may actually enact the very same provision that came as an executive order. With regard to this due process case with Tren de Agua, there could be an expedited hearing process, and it's going to moot a whole lot of the left-wing strategy.
Interesting. Horace Cooper, thank you so much for being with us. We appreciate you.
So that was a perfectly stated recap of what took place. What happened is very interesting. The Democrats were so desperate to stop President Trump. They relied on a federal judge, Boasberg, to potentially put Trump in criminal contempt of court because he wanted flights to return and he wanted information on a negotiated deal between the country of El Salvador, President Nayib Bukele, and the country of the United States of America, President Donald Trump. But once flights leave politics is supposed to end at the water's edge. Politics is supposed to stop at the water's edge. Now you're getting into foreign policy. The Supreme Court looked at the case and actually came to the conclusion that, oh, by the way, the federal judge doesn't have jurisdiction in Texas, which is where all of this emanated from, the state where the petition was filed. So the Supreme Court, the Supreme Court's giving Trump, lifting the injunction on the Alien Enemies Act, overturning the initial federal court ruling in D.C., just gave Trump a huge precedent on his way to eventually the Supreme Court ending nationwide injunctions. Now, Democrats can't simply shop for judges if the precedent states now if a legal challenge originates in Texas or originates in any specific state, you can't get a judge in Washington to issue a nationwide injunction. That's at least the precedent that this Supreme Court decision created, which is exactly the opposite of what Democrats wanted. Okay? Now you have the following. AOC backing President Trump, and I think this will be one of the reasons Justice Roberts and maybe even one of the liberals back Trump on ending nationwide injunctions. This is on X. I don't have an account on X or Instagram or Facebook. I just have my YouTube channel and the two other channels. Hit subscribe right now. Check this out. This is AOC backing President Trump.
When you've heard the news this afternoon, a couple hours ago, what did you think?
Well, I think rulings like this, and I think we've seen from the FDA and also from activity in Congress, that some of these rulings, I think we've been preparing and anticipating for there being these egregious overreaches by members of the judiciary appointed by a right-wing Republican Party whose goal for a very long time was to just pack these courts with partisan judges, often underqualified or completely unqualified for their role. And so there has been thought, I believe, given to this. Senator Ron Wyden has already issued statements, for example, advising what we should do in a situation like this, which I concur, which is that I believe that the Biden administration should ignore this ruling. I think that the courts have the legitimacy.
AOC, the frontrunner for the Democratic nominee for president in 2028, just stated a while back during Biden's administration that Biden should ignore a federal court order and ruling. Now, of course, Democrats are saying that Trump is a tyrant and a despot and authoritarian. He's not listening to the court orders. He is. But you had AOC and Ron Wyden and other Democrats saying that Biden should ignore a federal court nationwide injunction because the judge was partisan. This is exactly what President Trump is saying. But when Democrats say it, they can then change their minds and change their tune, instantly. But let's continue.
And they rely on the legitimacy of their rulings. And what they are currently doing is engaged in an unprecedented and dramatic erosion of the legitimacy of the courts. It is the justices themselves, through the deeply partisan and unfounded nature of these rulings, that are undermining their own enforcement.
So you're saying the Biden administration should ignore this court, but what does that look like? What does that actually mean?
I think
Well, Democrats would refer to that as authoritarianism, but let's listen to what AOC says it is.
The interesting thing when it comes to a ruling is that it relies on enforcement, and it is up to the Biden administration to choose whether or not to enforce such a ruling.
But do we want to live in a world where a government can decide to ignore a federal court ruling?
Well, no, of course. I mean, I do think that it raises a.
And the word salad continues. But this, ladies and gentlemen, is huge because you have the upcoming court case on birthright citizenship. Vox, the Supreme Court's birthright citizenship, isn't really about that topic. Courthouse, Supreme Court confronts Trump power grab. Courthouse News and others, Vox, they could have simply said that AOC backs President Trump, which she does, which is one reason I think Justice Roberts is on his way. I think it's a done deal. Ending nationwide injunctions. Hit subscribe to this channel right now. This is huge. Share this everywhere.